Hi, I'm 𝗵𝗔𝗡𝗏, CEO and founder of Wall Street Oasis. This chat is with Helen, a WSO Academy alum that was able to break into front office investment banking at Raymond James, coming from Wake Forest. She joined the Academy early her sophomore year, and in this chat, she shares one of the key ways the program helped improve her resume to land more interviews. Enjoy. All right, Helen, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Obviously, congratulations on your internship, on your offer. Let's start out with just giving the listeners just a little summary of your background, kind of where you're from and all that.
So I'm Helen. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina originally, and am now a sophomore at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So at Wake Forest here, I got into the business school this past December of my sophomore year, which is super great and exciting, but also regarding the process for, investment banking and internships, it sets you a little bit behind just because you haven't taken any finance classes or anything like that. Outside of that, came to Wall Street Oasis to kind of get some help in that regard, I guess. So yeah.
And you're a soccer player, right? Or you used to play? Do you play at Wake or no?
I don't know. Senior year of high school, I hurt my knee, so I've been been out since then. But yeah,
so you joined WSO Academy. It was what, like a fall semester sophomore year, which what I would call kind of like the last, like the latest you could potentially join. Well, that's not true. I've had people join like January of like beginning of the spring semester and still have success, like still make it. But it was kind of like you were joining when right before like all the networking started kind of ramping and all that stuff. So let's talk a little bit about, I think, obviously when you joined, you got your resume reviewed, all that stuff, the AI stuff. But then the work with your story and the work with your like 7 stories and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about that and even who you worked with? I know Cindy helped do some mocks, but I'd love to hear some other stuff.
Yeah. I think that the 7 stories and stuff was one of the most helpful things that Wall Street Oasis kind of provided for me, just because, that and also just like the technical book of like all of those, obviously. But I think that, you think that you have good behavioral stories, but until you really start to look at them and dive into it, you don't realize how much is missing and how important it is to like have your story down to like a T. So I know I worked with Tim a little bit on that and one other person, but I'm blanking on the name, but definitely just kind of the more eyes I got on it, the more concise it got. And then the more I practiced it, the better you get at it, that sort of thing, just getting reps in. So I think that the 7 stories was definitely helpful. And then obviously the resume too. I remember for my resume, one of the main things I did was kind of make it more numeric. So that way, when they're looking at it, things kind of jump at them off the page, that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Quantification, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Did you put the internship for WSO on there or no? Did you stick with like what you had?
I did not. No, I didn't actually end up doing it just because I've been wrapped up in school, but yeah.
Yeah. And so then you basically kind of helped quantify your resume, helped, obviously, polish it, make it look as polished as possible, kind of going in. Worked on your story, and then you got to kind of the networking launch. Let's talk about like networking. It was pretty much go time as soon as you had gotten your stories done to start that outreach. I think you were looking to kind of stay around the Charlotte area, correct?
Yeah, so I was definitely looking to kind of stay around the Charlotte area just because I know I like the South. Wasn't sure how set on New York I really was, but and also my school has a pretty big Charlotte, kind of alumni network there. So definitely trying to work that a little bit and if I could, but for the networking, I think that, it was right after New Year's, I think, and I just kind of dove headfirst into it. And I think that's something that was definitely really helpful with Wall Street Oasis because, kind of getting your emails like set up in templates and just kind of being able to, send out a mass number of emails and as long as you can stay organized and keep up with it, it was definitely one of those things that just, the more you do it, the more used to it you get. And you realize that people do actually, want to talk to you and are willing to talk to you. So I think that, kind of the push to start was helpful.
Were your like numbers really high since you were so hyper-focused in like one region? I'd be curious to hear like, let's say you reached out to 100 bankers, right? In the area, or how many of them were like Wake alum? How many of them were just random Charlotte bankers? And would you say it was like pretty high conversion to like an actual phone call? Like, so out of 100 people, did you get on the call with like 15 of them or 30 of them?
Yeah, I think that those numbers sound about right. I know that the majority of the people I got on the phone with were all Wake alum, and then outside of that, like they would connect me with someone else at the bank, which were sometimes Wake alums, sometimes just in their group or that sort of thing.
Like the
but I think that
the warm intros.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that in regards to like hits back, I did it pretty much strictly through LinkedIn and just connecting with people, seeing who would connect with me, and then sending them a message. And I would say for like every 20 I sent, I would get somewhere between 5 to 10 hits back, which I was pretty surprised actually. I thought that my hit rate was pretty good. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it tends to be for the listeners out there, if you're getting a 20% hit rate, don't feel bad in terms of like people could actually. If you're going alum, it should be closer to the 30 to 50% range in terms of people accepting your connection request, and then from there getting them onto the phone. Usually with certain follow-ups and cadence and all that stuff, it's usually about another 10% of that group that actually connects with you, usually gets on the phone with you. It can be upwards of 20 to 30% though if they're alum, if they're rah-rah, WIG or rah-rah.
Exactly.
So I think just keep that in mind. I think, the key here though is like a lot of people see the networking as like it's a necessary evil, and they're like, oh my gosh, they really dread it, especially freshmen or sophomore who like done it before. And so I think it's important. Like, I'd be curious to hear your perspective. Did you feel like it got easier and easier? Did you feel like it was still kind of awkward near the end? And do you think that helped you at all in terms of the interviews too?
Yeah, I think it definitely helped in terms of the interviews, just because the more you get to like talking with people, you know, in the investment banking world or in whatever world it is you're trying to get into, I think that you just get more comfortable with it. But I definitely think, I mean, at the beginning, like if I think back to like my first couple calls to like towards the end, like you definitely learn a lot as you go with how to do them. But you also like, you never really know who you're going to get on the phone with or if they're having a bad day or whatever. So like every once in a while you get people that just seems like they don't want to be on the phone with you, but you know.
Did you ever have anybody like hang up on you after like 5 minutes?
No, I didn't have that, but sometimes you get some short answers, that sort of thing when you're asking questions, that sort of stuff. But I know you got to remember that they're all super busy and that sort of stuff. But definitely great prep for the interviews. I think that towards the end too, if I were reaching out to people that I had interviews with, you know, coming up with, trying to get my name in the mix, you know, they'd ask me some technicals, that sort of thing. So it's also just good to almost like a mock interview in a sense, not exactly the same, but definitely good for reps.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you did have some of these informational interviews turn into kind of technical interviews.
Yeah, there were one or two that I was ready for them because I'd been studying for it, but at the same time they'll catch you off guard a little bit, and you're like, all right,
yeah, that's why.
Here we go.
I know why we have networking a little bit later in the academy, not right at the beginning.
Exactly.
Some people come in, they're like, I need a network. I'm like, but you don't know any technicals. You have stories a mess. I'm like, you're just gonna fall on your face. So okay, so that's really interesting. Do you feel like I'm sure with some of these calls, like you prep some questions. Do you feel like when you went into it, you were able to kind of go off script as you got more comfortable? Like, or do you feel like you still stuck to the question and you kept coming back to them? I'd love to, because like I know for some people it just flows naturally. They're more like friendly or whatever, or they talk about something that maybe you're interested in and it's easier. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that it kind of depended on the person I was talking to. If it was someone who was, you know, really like holding the conversation with me, and you know, sometimes the person on the other end of the line will kind of like take control of the conversation and they'll do it for you, and other times they don't, and kind of depending on how they would take the phone call, I would just kind of run with that. So I had like, you know, a basic like 10 or so questions that I always had in my back pocket in case I needed them, but definitely as I did more of the calls, the more comfortable you get and the more you can kind of take what they're saying and come up with your own questions, you know, make it a little more personal, I guess, in that sense. But yeah.
Great. That's helpful. And then, so you had mentioned let's talk about like interview prep now. You had mentioned you had done some kind of technical, like you looked at the technical course and the Mount Monster deck we have for all the students. I always tell people, I'm like, okay, print this out and sleep with it for like 2 weeks. Like next to your pillow. No, ideally, you are doing some of that self-study. I'm curious, did you do any of the boot camps at all? Like the IB interview boot camp or financial modeling evaluation boot camp?
I did one of the boot camps. I think it was the basic like IB
interview.
IB interview one. Exactly. Yeah.
Did you feel like that helped at all for like getting ready, or is it just kind of reinforcing what you already knew?
I think it was helpful, but I also did it earlier in the process before I'd really dug into a lot of the technicals. So I think it would have been more helpful if I had a better base of knowledge first going into it. But it was also just good to kind of have someone walk you through it before I had it. So when I was going over it later, things made a little bit more sense. But yeah.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk about like kind of how things progressed for you. So you were networking. How many people do you think you got on the phone with total?
Like 40 to 50, I would say, over the course of like, there were like 2 months that I was like, doing all networking, and then fizzled out a little bit as interview started. But yeah. Okay.
And so then from there, like how many, did you get a lot of high reviews, or did you go straight into first rounds, or how did that work? Phone screen?
Kind of depended on the bank. I got a lot of high reviews, but the high reviews are interesting because you never really know when you're going to hear back. So you'll send a high review in, and then, so it would be like weeks, months. Some of them I think I'm done and still haven't technically heard back from. But and then some first rounds.
We do have a high review simulation for people to kind of get the awkward out of staring into a camera. It's very, very strange to look into a camera and have, why banking or whatever. But so we had that simulation. It's out graded. I don't know if you knew that. We actually are grading them. And then we also, I think before you got through, we started grading the mock interviews. So you did get
really
some grade. I think you got maybe 1 or 2 graded, but
yeah, I think you're right.
I'd love to hear just the feedback that you got from the mentors and how that progressed in terms of your mocks. And did you like mock as well with like upperclassmen? Did you mock just with the head mentors, or how did that work in that split?
Yeah. I mocked pretty much strictly with the mentors. I had my dad ask me some questions too, just for like a face-to-face interaction. So you get used to that sort of thing as the super days were coming up. But I guess, my first mock interview was with Cindy. And so we went through some behaviorals and then jumped into some of the more basic technicals. And I think like the main thing I got back from it was that, my behaviorals were all pretty good. At that point, I had my walk me through your resume down decently well.
Yeah.
For having not done that many interviews yet and stuff. But I think that the main thing I learned from the technicals, which was super beneficial for like doing more and more mock interviews, was that you have to like speak out how you're thinking. So that way, if you get it wrong, the person on the other end knows where you're going with it, or can, kind of see what your thought process is. And so I think that was something that I definitely wasn't doing at first. And then the more I did it, the more I kind of got the hang of that, because it's definitely kind of a learned skill, because there's no other instance where you really need to do that. And then I think the other part of it was that, I was studying these technicals for like weeks trying to learn what an LBO is in a DCF, and I thought I knew it. And you can know the definition, but it's very different when they ask you a question where you have to apply what it is. And so that was definitely something that was hugely beneficial to really make sure that I really had a handle on the concepts.
Yeah, it's like you study, you put your head down, but then you're all of a sudden someone's asking you to verbally deliver it is another.
Exactly.
It's like they say, like, in order to teach material, and you're in an interview, you're really teaching, like you're teaching it back, and then they're asking you like little nuanced questions on like to make sure you really understand it. And so it's just another level of knowledge that you need to get to deliver a good interview. So that's awesome. So okay, so how many like first rounds did you get invited to, or high reviews, and then how many like super days would you say you were in? And then yeah, why don't you share the results, the great results?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I did, I think around like 8 to 10 first rounds in total. Most of those were like first round phone calls, that sort of thing. I think the one I actually, I guess, I mean, I'm going to be working at Raymond James in their healthcare group in Charlotte. And so their first round was actually just a high review, and then it was straight to the super day. But none of the other ones I did were like that. And then I ended up doing 3 super days in total. 2 were in person and 1 was virtual. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that...
Were you surprised at the super day? Like anything that shocked you kind of going...
I think that, I mean, you hear a lot about super days and know that it's going to be a lot, just because it's like, one of mine was like 6 20 minutes back to back, I think. And the other one was...
No break? No break.
Yeah, no break. It was rough. Yeah. And then the other one was a little shorter. It was like 4 15 minutes back to back. And so I think that, they're going to be draining, but it's not until you're in it that you realize, like, it's just rapid fire questions the entire time, and you got to stay on top of it all. So it's definitely definitely rough, but
Yeah,
you get used to it, I guess.
I think it's I think it's almost more tiring when it's a new person where you have to like retell it's like, okay, I just said this. It's kind of almost like awkward for yourself because it's kind of like you've done it so many times already practicing.
Exactly.
So, I think it's not so much like the length of it, it's how many you have to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And you start to feel like you're being repetitive and you forget who you told what to.
Like, did I tell this story to this person already? Or
exactly.
Delusional. That's great. Well, no, I really appreciate you sharing your story with everybody. Any kind of final words of wisdom for people that are kind of approaching either the recruiting milestone or kind of considering high findings as a career? Any thoughts for them?
I think that, the recruiting process seems tough, but once you get going, it's not as bad as you think, and just got to make as many connections as you can and be friendly. So
good.
Best of luck.
All right. Thanks, Helen. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.